We've worked our way through overviews of the first three levels of the Becoming Equipped to Communicate program. And now we're going to briefly look at the last of those levels, level 4. So during this particular stage, learners are going to be continuing to grow in their ability to work in the language and culture and talk about, especially now, having dealt with the life stories of people, begin to talk about, explore the beliefs that motivate the behavior of the people that they're encountering in the communities. And in thinking through those beliefs, they want to, learners, you as a learner want to understand the opinions of those people around you and to be able to support your own opinions in conversation about topics that are bigger than just local concrete situations, world issues in that sense, abstract issues. Find ways to adequately communicate about those concepts, even concepts at times that are new to you, that are linguistically unfamiliar, but that you need to be able to describe. And that would include and point toward conversations eventually about God and His purposes in that context. And so that's why we describe level 4 as relating through worldview conversation or life view conversation with people. This particular level is found in introduction in pages 187 and 188, which you should have read. And on those pages, we also describe in detail a description of the goal of your proficiency at this level, because this is now we're coming to the place in our ability where we've set a mark for how we want to be able to communicate in language and culture and social understanding in level 4, such that we can then move into the kinds of cross-cultural tasks that we're all about, that our whole focus is on. And so hopefully as you read the description, you can imagine yourself in that kind of a place eventually, that you can imagine yourself feeling as a natural part of the community, interacting very normally with the people around you. There's a lot of work to get to that point, but we can assure you that it's possible, that many people have used, in fact, this very resource and made that effort and have become functional and effective members of a new community, competent communicators, competent listeners, competent cultural insiders. And what an exciting privilege it is as someone who can speak from experience to get to the place where you can be that kind of an insider in a cultural setting. Something that as you grow towards that point, that your perspective of life, in fact, you as an individual, your perspective of life will be forever changed. And you as a person won't be the same because of the privilege and opportunity of working towards that kind of proficiency that is described in level 4. Now, we had communicated about the cultural threads in earlier tutorials, those 4 primary areas of life that we described to talk about how we would give overview to a cultural situation. And we applied those to a number of contexts around the world. And that becomes very practical and relevant here because in the next pages of this resource, and we introduce those again in relationship to our learning at level 4. We introduce these 4, we call 4 life perspectives, and how we can apply them in this level as we participate in the main learning activity for this level, which we call life view or worldview conversation. These are the kinds of conversations now that you can have with the local people there during this last stage of your learning, and that whole process is carefully outlined for you. The one that you began in level 3, and then these 4 life perspectives which have been introduced will be covered in a much greater detail here in level 4 so that you can apply that exercise to your daily learning plans for level 4. And so you'll be further exploring then in that Life View Conversations exercise, you'll be further exploring these 4 life perspectives that we've already introduced as you talk with community members, that you'll want to know how people are motivated in acting the ways that they act in the community. Now we're describing getting into the why of people's behavior, and you actually having the ability in the language and cultural context to be able to talk with people about that in their own language. So not having to depend on a second language to be able to understand their underlying beliefs about life, for example. How do people's beliefs that they claim, the theoretical basis that we described from James Sire in answering those questions, how do they measure up to the core commitments that are actually manifest in their behavior, the morals and actions that are manifest from our worldview model? These kinds of insights are really important to us as we look forward to communicating God's truth at a later date. Because we first, in thinking about the way to communicate truth, we first need to understand these ways that people are really thinking about life, the ways that they're continually and consistently applying the things that they think are truth in their lives, so that we can then contrast and share God's truth to them in relevant ways. And so having an understanding, an awareness of what motivates their behavior per what they say, and then what inconsistencies in that behavioral motivation we are manifest in practical life action for them is part of the process of our applying these 4 life perspectives in life view conversations with people that we're hopefully moving toward ministering to. And so level 4 directs us in very relevant ways towards that overarching goal that we have of speaking God's story effectively into another cultural setting. That message, that narrative message that we've come to bring, that bridges into that context. We need the language and culture that's adequate and engaging and relevant for us to really communicate that message clearly. That we are applying now in this level, in life view conversation, we're applying the kinds of exercises that are going to make us that kind of effective communicators for that particular role that God has for us. The one who maybe not as a teacher necessarily, although some will be, but certainly regular communicators of truth in even an informal conversation and in the ways that we understand those cultural contexts, that we will be spending time in this level, in important conversations through a whole range of topics that are very specifically related to our goals. And so the challenge and the privilege really of conversation, extensive conversation, life view conversation at this kind of a level. And a privilege that we feel as we move forward and see our ability grow as well. And you can look at those pages in the Becoming Equipped to Communicate guide and recognize that when you read those descriptions, you realize that we're not talking about some surface level kind of conversation, just what we'd think of as chit-chat or casual information exchange. These are activities that are well thought through, that are planned beforehand, of finding a whole range of people to talk with and planning very specifically topics that you'll cover in your life view conversations with them. And then you working in advance to develop good questions to ask, thinking through how you can progress through an in-depth conversation at a deep level in an extended kind of speech and discourse that goes beyond the paragraphs that you would have established in level 3. Thinking about the relevant cultural and relational issues of the particular person whose life story you'll have heard, and then following a correct procedure and process to accomplish that. And that's these kinds of activities where we engage our minds, even in our own language and cultural setting, let alone in a second one, take practice. They're activities that, as the BEC communicates to us, that we need to practice those kinds of steps in our own setting, in our own language, with our people from our own community, so that as we apply them in other settings, that we'll have those experiences as places to reference for the challenge, the increased challenge of trying to do that in a second culture and language. So, because of that, because we recognize the daunting nature of that challenge, a doable challenge, but somewhat daunting, in the activity that's related to this tutorial, we're going to review that process by having you read carefully how to conduct the LifeView Conversations activity, and then you will actually go through the process of planning topics and questions for a LifeView conversation with someone of your own language. And then in the next 2 tutorials, we'll have you talk with 2 different people that you know in your own community so that you can be practicing the process, the steps, the procedures of that. And you can be getting an idea of what it's going to take for you to then apply those level 4 activities, those really significant kinds of conversation that lead us to the place where we can be effective communicators of truth, what it would take to apply those then in a second cultural setting based on having done that in your own culture.